Moshe Sakal is a mental health coach who shares lessons he learned from recovering from his own mental health. He has supported individuals recovering from depression, bipolar disorder, and psychosis. And then Moshe has worked in the Canada's largest mental health hospital and currently works as a mental health organization that supports the Asian community. He also coaches individuals to go from mental crisis to mental wellness by focusing on 3 principles of learning, listening, and letting go. We're excited to have you on, Moshe, today to present to us, and looking forward to the webinar today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction as well. And good afternoon, everybody. We just made it into the afternoon, so it's good to see everybody. And thank you to Alpita and Scott, to Shara, and everyone at Group Sarah for inviting me to share this information and knowledge with you, and talk about my experiences, and maybe give you some things that might help you, and hopefully they can help you in supporting individuals that you're caring for. I'm ready to start whenever people want it. I'm always curious to know who's at the webinar, like what their backgrounds are. I'm not sure if we have time for that, but it'd be interesting to hear if people are providers, they work in organizations, have their own private practice. If you're someone with like me who's been involved in peer support. So if we have time for that, we'll invite people to share. If not, we can leave it for the end.
Should we just speak and tell you what we do?
Sure, yeah, why not?
Okay, I work with an organization called Family Service of the Piedmont. I am a bilingual outpatient mental health therapist.
Very nice. I'm curious to know what the other language is.
Spanish.
Oh, hola.
Hola.
I'm learning Portuguese, and I'll talk about that later, but I love salsa dancing, so thank you. And what was your name?
That would be very helpful. I'm sorry. Selenia Martinez.
Great to meet you. Thank you.
Same here.
If anybody else wants to introduce themselves, they're welcome to. And I'll start in about a minute or so.
Sure, I'll go. My name is Marcus Fitzpatrick. I run a private practice, also the owner, usually the case, so not that special, I guess. But I'm in Denver, and I work with a variety of populations, but mostly, the general depression, anxiety crowd. Got some bipolar, got, let's see, brain. Have right now a lot of children from narcissistic mothers. That's kind of a new theme that somehow has come to me, and I'm doing some research on that. There's a certain dynamic. I see some nodding, so I don't know if that's coming out because of COVID or what, but that seems to be a new trend. So anyways, I do a lot, and my private practice focuses mostly on getting people from the guttural bottom to the tippy top. So it's not just, hey, let's feel good and feel better about yourself, but it's also, let's improve your life in some kind of way. That's kind of a measure of my business.
Thank you for sharing that. Welcome. I'm going to touch on some of the things you talked about, actually, and I'm curious to get your point of view, and I'll explain what I mean by that in the introduction as well. Maybe one or two other people want to introduce themselves, and then I'll jump in to the presentation, which is what you came here for.
Michelle, Aurora, would you like to say anything about yourselves?
Okay, no problem. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll take that as a sign to start. Thank you for those introductions. It really helps to know who's in the room. And I'm going to see if I can share the screen here. Okay, so it's not coming up on the, it did when we tried the test, but let me try it again. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So you see the full slide? Is that working on your end?
Yes, it works just fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. This is the webinar on thriving after crisis. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself as I go along. I'll tell you why I'm presenting this and the work I'm currently involved in as well. I have a practice that I just started this year called The Mind Within. And I'm going to be, whatever I'm presenting is a work in progress. I hope that this conversation is casual and not really formal, but I believe it was Marcus, I forgot the name right, you had mentioned that it's like bringing people from the bottom to the top, helping them rebuild their life, not just helping them feel good. And I hope that this is, the content that I present here will give you some of that perspective as well. So I'll talk about the purpose and aim of this presentation. Please interrupt me if there's any questions or if there's an interruption in the connection and I need to repeat myself. I'll talk about as well as the summary of the stages from crisis to thriving. And hopefully I will show you how you can apply these to the clients that you're supporting. I'll give you an overview of some of the key mental health principles that Peter was mentioning, the learning, listening, and letting go, if there's time for that. And I really want to make time for questions and answers. So I think it's really good to talk about what this is, what I'm aiming to do, so you understand where I'm coming from. So I geared this presentation for providers, and I'll tell you a bit about my background as well in mental health, aside from my mental health coaching practice. I also want to offer a different perspective on mental health, and because my experiences reflect that, and maybe reinforce things that you are doing and learned about recovery, and discover maybe something new and build on that. And I'm very open to hearing your feedback, especially if this would be relevant to the people you're supporting. So a little bit about me. I have a background in chemistry, and around 2010, I had a mental health crisis. I was doing my master's degree over an extended period of time, and I was experiencing stress. At the time, I broke up a relationship. I was engaged to someone, and I ended that relationship really abruptly after a few months, and it led me into a place where I was feeling depressed, overwhelmed, stressed, feeling guilty and ashamed. And all of that led to a crisis, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But through that crisis, I got training in peer support earlier on, and that was a game changer. I left chemistry behind and got involved as an advocate in peer support, and found my first job as a peer support worker at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It's Canada's largest mental health hospital, and that was really formative time for me because it helped me really understand what it means to support other people and understand my recovery. I was also a service user educator, meaning that I was educating medical students and psychiatry residents in their about recovery and my experiences, and maybe giving them a different perspective, so that it wasn't just the medical model that they were focusing on. And that was at University of Toronto as well. I got involved in Peer Positive, which is an initiative that similar to some of the other initiatives out there, which is really about co-design, co-delivery, and co-review of programs. You're encouraging service users to get involved and participate in the services that they're using. And that led to my current job as a peer coach, where I'm supporting the development of peer support programs, and also helping with the training of peer support volunteers and workers. And currently I have my mental health coaching practice, which I mentioned. I'm just going to put the timer on. Okay. So I mentioned that my first mental health crisis happened in 2009, and that was really around psychosis. The reason why I was able to support people through depression, bipolar disorder, and psychosis is because that's something I've went through myself. So I have a good understanding of it from a lived experience point of view. Obviously, it's not a medical model point of view, and everything that I talk about is really from that perspective. I've spoken to the really good psychiatrists, and often I hear that medications are not enough, and so the content that I share here is to build on that. Medications can solve maybe 20% of the problem. The person still needs to learn how to rebuild their life, and so I had to learn to do that. And when I finally accepted that there was a problem in 2011, I went into the hospital, but I was still under a state of psychosis for a number of years, actually. And I was living in this fantasy for 4 years. And I can go into the details if you have any questions around that experience, but essentially that's where this narcissism came in, and where I felt I was Jesus Christ, and I was married to the spirit of Princess Diana, and having a spiritual interest throughout my life, adult life, let's say, that it made sense to me. The fantasy itself was obviously not. It was a fantasy. It wasn't real. There's certain elements of it that were true, and I can speak to that. But essentially, I created this reality, and it was very chaotic, stressful, but also like euphoric at the same time. And I was able to come out of it thanks to a spiritual counselor who, Tina, who's a psychic and medium and very gifted, and she was the one who made the difference, because from 2011 to 2014, I was still on medications. I wasn't telling really people about this fantasy. I was hiding it from people, and some people knew, but they didn't really tell me that they didn't really challenge me on it. Whereas when Tina came into my life, we were friends in the beginning, and then she helped me through counseling, and just addressed the issue straight on from the messages that she shared, and she challenged me to reflect on the fact that this was a fantasy. I do believe I'm still a spiritual person. I believe that we can connect with, like, mediums exist, and I believe in all that part of it. That wasn't the delusional part. It's just the projections I've had and the grandiosity of the story that really was what I had to learn to let go of. And so I went through this period of acceptance and developing self-worth and letting go. And to be honest, it's still happening. That's why I said it's 2020. But I'm feeling like I'm going towards a new stage of my recovery, and all this whole journey is thanks to the counseling that I got from Tina, and she helped me see how I can bring these experiences and build them into a framework that might support other people by giving context to their experiences. And for you as a provider, then maybe you can reflect on it. To be honest, as I mentioned in the aim of the presentation, some of this is not going to be new to you, but it may help to have this conversation again to reflect on. I'm going to talk about this later on, but it's always nice to have an image in a presentation, but also because there are certain elements of this image that will speak to what I will bring up later on. Okay. So our definition as providers is to help improve someone's mental health and overall well-being. That's where we're going. Whenever we're meeting with someone that approaches us for support. And that's easier said than done. How do you know how to do that? What elements do you focus on? And in a minute, I'll show a recovery roadmap that will maybe give context that you can reflect on and give context to that person's experience. I may have not said this before, but what I'm doing with the content that you're seeing here is I'm hoping to develop a manual and courses in the future that build on this. And so, yeah, I'm not at the moment ready to share all the content, but I hope that at least in this presentation, you'll be able to take something away from it. So I think when you want to go anywhere, you need to know where you stand. And in terms of our mental health understanding, I know that my experiences, especially if you've been in the field for a long time, you might have heard of these experiences. It's not uncommon for anyone who's supporting someone with psychosis to hear that a person believes they're Jesus Christ, or they have these grandiose points of view, excuse me. And so that's, but what I think that it emphasizes that we still have a limited understanding of where we are in terms of mental health and what it's all about. And so there's always room to learn. And I often go back to an example in science itself with Dr. Semmelweis. If you don't know him, he's very relevant to our times. He was the one who came up with the idea that the doctors need to make sure that they sanitize their hands before they do any operations. And at the time, people were laughing at him. His own colleagues thought he was mentally ill, and they criticized him for it. But eventually, because at the time they didn't realize that there were such things as bacteria, they didn't have evidence for that. So it's a great. I think this is a great example of some of the things that my beliefs in, and I'm not unique in my beliefs. I think it's just that the mental health system has been seen mental illness in a certain framework, and what this slide is suggesting is that we come out of our comfort zone a little bit, and we open ourselves up to different possibilities in a way that's grounded, which is what I've learned to do. And I wanted to highlight that consciousness and the idea of spirituality is still a new science in certain ways. And so I wanted to just share the quote. I really like it. Kenneth Shinazuka is an inventor. He's a young inventor, and he designed a device. It's a smart sock, because his grandfather has Alzheimer's, and he would get up in the middle of the night, and his family was obviously worried about it, and he invented a sock that is connected to an app, and every time that his grandfather woke up in the middle of the night, the app would beep to let the family know. And this quote, I think, is really relevant to what I just said, is that science has produced an outstandingly accurate description of the outer world, but it has told us very little, if anything, about our internal consciousness. And I invite you to consider the significance of this statement, because it also reflects onto you as a practitioner and how you understand yourself. So the meat of this presentation is this recovery roadmap. I'll share the sequence of stages. There's 5 main stages that I really break it down to. I'll tell you what the stages are, what's involved in each stage, and how you can some of the things that you can consider as you're supporting someone in their recovery. So there's 2 ways. If you just simplify things, a person can be categorized in 2 categories when it comes to their recovery. One is that they have a normal existence, and then they experience a crisis or a trauma, a life-changing event that changes the course of their life. Similar to my story 10 years ago. My normal experience was being a chemistry student for a long time. There's another group of people who don't have a normal life, and they just grow up in trauma and in chaos. And so that's the beginning stages of the roadmap. I'll talk more about the details of what happens in these stages, and I'll also tie it to literature. I forgot to mention as well. But after these events, this is where recovery begins, and that over time, a person also moves into other stages of their journey where they explore and discover things about themselves or about their past, and which brings understanding to some of that chaos and confusion that happens in the trauma. They move towards building community and purpose, and ultimately they connect with a sense of truth and trust in themselves. I will say that this is not necessarily a chronological order. The events that happen, they overlap. There's no clear-cut process. But as you'll see, these are actually common themes in other people's experiences as well. And there was another point I wanted to bring out, but I'll probably come to it later. So I think this is really the main message of this presentation, I think, is that sometimes we have to come to know who we're not to discover who we truly are. And sometimes that happens because of a crisis. And I know that a lot of the experiences that I had were based on my ego and just not really having a sense of my own identity, a sense of meaning. My psychosis happened late in life. I'm 41 years old, and it happened around 30, 31, where I was feeling all my friends at the time were getting married, buying houses, and I was still living with my parents. And as a student, I know that's a common theme for a lot of students right now, but at the time I just felt out of place, and much of my recovery was also feeling there was a part of me that felt sorry for myself, and I had to get to know what that was all about. And so I said, this image, we return to this image because I feel like it says a number of things, and I'll refer to our environment towards the end of this presentation. But it just what we provide as, I think the best thing we can do when we're providing support to someone is offering perspective. To me, every time I see this slide, it kind of just gives me serenity, like a sense of peace, and reminds me that we live on a planet that's in the middle of a solar system and a galaxy, and there's this like massive universe, and I think that's where spirituality really can help support somebody, is separating themselves a little bit from their sense of who they are and just feeling connected to a larger universe. And there's also something about this image that speaks to the unknown of our journey. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of this webinar. We don't know where life is taking us. And so that sense of trust and the level of trust that we put in ourselves is really connecting to the trust of the cosmos, God, the source, whatever you might call it. So what happens in each stage? So in the crisis and confusion, I think it's pretty obvious what happens in each, but I wanted to highlight a few things so that when you're reflecting on your practice or when you're with someone, it may help to kind of reinforce, okay, maybe highlight a few things that they're saying that you're like, okay, you can help identify where a person's at if it's not already obvious to you. But the crisis and confusion phase is really the stage where a person's feeling isolated. They don't have a sense of control over their life. They feel hopeless, despair, and ultimately there's also a lack of support. There are many different nuances, again. So sometimes a person's not ready to seek support, as I know I wasn't for the first few years. And but then ultimately the recovery begins when that person's open to it, and that person acknowledges that help is needed. They connect with the right support. And I think that varies from person to person. I don't think I would have gone as well as I have without the support of Tina and her counseling, because that spoke to me. I'm sure a practitioner could have called me out, but I don't know if you met people with psychosis. We can be pretty stubborn. And that's the reason why for the wrong reasons, that is. I think that's why we have these realities. That reality served a purpose because it provided an escape from the existence I had at the time. And I felt loved and a sense of connection and a sense of meaning and wanting to make a difference in the world and all these things, but it's very distorted. I feel like having the right support and knowing that whether or not we are the right support for someone, I think requires humility in what we do. So recovery also begins when a person's creating some structure and having routines in their life. They're regaining control, their confidence grows a little bit. Importantly, they set boundaries with people in their past or currently in their life, especially if the person has been someone who had led to some trauma, setting those boundaries with that individual, and finding hope and believing that things can get better. The exploration and discovery phase is about being open to new possibilities, taking responsibility, acknowledging that you messed up if you did, and coming to terms with that, taking risks and trying new things, discovering and reconnecting with our strengths, gifts, and talents. When you learn about recovery and in literature, that's a big theme, is really helping the individual identify what their strengths are. And we all have them. It's just a matter of, can we, as our practitioner and provider, can we reflect that back to the person? Can we see it through all the noise that the person and the chaos that the person is experiencing, especially if they're at the early stages of their recovery? And I will say that's one of my most satisfying, it's one of the things that satisfies me in my role is being able to pick those things out, because I'm not caught up in that person's story. This stage is also about healing and connecting with peace, and letting go of some of the pain, the hurt, regret, blame, and shame. And again, this is an ongoing process, but this is an element that's really necessary if the person wants to continue improving their mental health and well-being. And it's appreciating. Sorry, let me just. I have this. Appreciating the success and accomplishments, again, reflecting that person's strength. The next phase is the community and purpose, and this is really connecting with other people around you and building on your discoveries of what you learn about yourself. So one of the things that, aside from peer support, I discovered I was an artist. I connected with an organization here called Workman Arts, who supports individuals with mental illness. And I discovered that I'm a really good photographer. Some of the paintings that you see behind me are mine. And that was a new sense of identity for me. Also, community and purpose is creating something that matters to the individual, making an impact in their personal or professional life, finding fulfillment, meaning their purpose, and inspiring others to do the same. I recognize these are common words that we talk about. It's another thing to actually help someone discover that in themselves. And I think that's where you're listening is a really important part of what we do. And another part of this phase is where the individual decides, and this is very common in individuals who come into peer support, is wanting to do that for others. As you get better and healthier, you want to share that with your story and also inspire others to find hope. The last one, and this is the stage that I'm currently in, is that it's letting go of the identity of trauma or illness. At this point, I don't consider myself ill in any way mentally. I have clarity about myself, though I'm still letting go of that identity, if that makes sense. And if you've gone through your own journey related to mental health, you'll know that sometimes it takes your mind and body an adjustment, and even your emotional maturity to accept that you're not where you used to be, because it becomes such a reoccurring theme in your life for a long time. So you're living to your full potential. You're trusting that you can make the right decisions. You're trusting that essentially the universe has your back. And I recognize that that can be challenging when at certain events, even when you're at the stage when things are not going your way. It can be. I think one of the challenges is to be able to see things in that perspective, that you're not alone, and that there's some guidance that is there to support you. So again, it's being flexible and seeing things in another perspective. It's really thriving. That's what the title of the presentation is. It's thriving and constantly wanting to improve and learn. And essentially what this stage is meant to do is letting the individual develop their own roadmap to a better future. So I said I'm learning Portuguese. I'm actually hoping to live in Portugal in the future and bring some of the work I do in peer support to that country, because that's something that's they're still lacking behind. But over the last 6-7 months, I've started to practice Portuguese, and it's to speak to this idea that it's something I'm moving towards a new adventure in my life, and taking all the things that I've gone through with me. So the highlights of the roadmap is that it gives an overview of recovery. It's not prescriptive. It's just essentially themes that you can watch out for. And the stages overlap, as I said earlier. They're not definitive. They can last for months or years. And it's very much unique to the individual's experience. It also emphasizes that recovery is a journey of self-discovery. And you know that the person that you're supporting is well when they have a clear understanding of who they are and they're able to put their experiences into context. And so storytelling is such a big part of our experiences. And I don't know if you, sure, I'm assuming people know this, but the left and the right brain are so different that in order to really help heal some of our experiences, we need the logical side of the left and the imagery and the memories of the right to come together, and sharing our experiences with someone else, journaling or doing it in a creative way is healing for us. As the saying goes, name it to tame it. So when you name your experiences and your emotions, neurobiology has already shown that it helps to calm the mind and help us feel better. There's other highlights I wanted to mention as well, is that the journey is really of letting go and allowing yourself to be who you're meant to be. And again, it focuses on an alternate perspective where it's about connecting with truth, not about symptom reduction and trying to maintain wellness in that way. It's really, I'm at that stage when I'm talking about truth, it's like I can distinguish when I'm attaching myself to a falsehood or a false belief of myself, and really connecting with my intuition in a clear way, in a way that's much healthier than it's ever been. And the grandiosity and wishful thinking of the past is coming to a point where I'm worrying less and less about that, and it's less on my mind. And this is the next thing I wanted to highlight, is that I recently came across the Chime Recovery Framework, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I saw that the model of change in this recovery framework overlap with the roadmap that I'm sharing. So I'll stop here for a moment to see if there's any questions before going to the next half of the presentation. Okay, well, I appreciate you listening. So I don't know if anybody's heard of this, or if you haven't heard of this. It's a common framework that was developed 10 years ago based on a systematic review of recovery research. And essentially, it's a conceptual framework that includes the characteristics of recovery, the recovery stages, and the recovery processes. The processes are listed here that's the acronym, the acronym of CHIME stand for these processes. And essentially, this was a review paper that looked at, I think, close to 100 recovery papers to identify what these stages and processes and characteristics of recovery are. And one of the things that they highlight is the recovery stages, as I mentioned, and this is a table from that paper. The reference is there for you if you'd like to check it out. But essentially, I don't know if people know about this trans-theoretical model of change. It's something that's new to me because my background's not really in psychology, but it's about that model of change is about pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and growth. So a person, before they decide to get help, as I was saying, they go through that crisis, and all those things that you see in that column kind of resonate with some of the things I've mentioned, where a person's overwhelmed by the disability, they feel demoralized, it feels like they're stuck or they're in hell. And then when the person's ready to accept help, they're contemplating it and they're reaching out for support. As it says, reawakening of hope after despair. So it's a turning point. And then the person's in that place of preparation where they're believing that change is possible. They're developing insight and activating their instincts to fight back if they, like I said, developing their boundaries. Or and again, as you see here, the turning point, and so what you're seeing on the left side, and that is just the papers where these models of change are coming from. But you see that the turning points is in one paper is highlighted in the contemplation phase, and another paper it's in the preparation phase or stage, and that's again to highlight that there is no clear distinction between them, as life is pretty fluid. And I'll let you check out the table yourself afterwards, but I just wanted to highlight again that these themes are similar to some of the themes that I mentioned in my recovery map, and I came to that recovery map based on the experiences I went through. So I guess my experiences validate what this paper highlights, and this paper validates my experiences in this and what I'm sharing. So how can this help your clients? And essentially, it clearly comes from making things simple, and I think that's our job really, is to, when someone's going through that confusion and chaos, especially, I think one of our roles is to bring some clarity into that person's life, and these recovery models and processes and this roadmap can help us do that, so that the person becomes more educated about where they are, where they've been, where they're at, and where they could potentially be going. So our role in offering support is really about listening and connecting, something I referred to, and in doing that, I know people in this webinar are familiar with these ideas. I'm sure you've done enough training around this concept. I just wanted to highlight the importance of that, because you're helping a person not only. So there are a variety of people that I've supported in the past. Some people are very secluded and withdrawn, and by listening and connecting, you're giving them an opportunity to develop their social skills and communication skills. There are other people who are in that state where they're very overwhelmed, overly stressed, and they just cannot not talk. And we have, in both of those cases, we have a different role to play. One is where you're trying to bring a person out of their shell, and another is where you're trying to help a person calm down and see things in a different perspective. And one of the things the gifts that Tina gave me was to challenge our beliefs. And I know from experience that takes a certain skill set to do, because I've done harm in my work by trying to be forceful and trying to push somebody to where I think they need to go. So it's also our role to reflect back to the person. And again, this is something that I've learned recently, comes from acceptance commitment therapy, and I'm learning more about it. But it's that mindfulness piece. A lot of actually what Tina had done for me as a counselor, though she doesn't know it, because she was just sharing her experiences in life as she recovered from her traumas, and the messages that she shared with Source were really about this. One of the things that ACT talks about is diffusion, and also our identity with our ego, and transcending that identity. That's, I think, really, really important. I think it's worth checking into if you haven't done any training around ACT. Allowing the person freedom to choose their own path is another part of our role, and that comes from motivational interviewing. The goal ultimately is for the peer to discover their strengths and true self, as I've highlighted in the past. There are a few slides that I want to share, but I'm going to aim to go for maybe another 5-10 minutes at the most. But I think the main things I wanted to highlight I've already shared. This is just a piece that I think is really important to put into the context of this conversation, is that our environments really are crucial for our recovery. And it doesn't matter how much positive thinking or how good a person feels about themselves if their environment doesn't support them. And this is a really great quote that Michael Unger, who's a social worker, I believe, he has a resilience center up here in Canada, and he says that he has a great book, and this is a quote that comes from that book: "When we are resilient, when the world around us provides us with the resources we need to do well." And he really hits home that message that it doesn't matter how resilient you are, you need to have a resilient environment around you. So I wanted to highlight that to help remind us that it's not just about the person discovering themselves and connecting with their true identity. It's really about who are there in that person's life to support that person to do that. And that's one of the things that we play as practitioners. So on language and perception, I wanted to highlight this in in a previous in an earlier webinar when I did this presentation, I put this at the front, but I feel like this really is the take-home message for you as well. So I moved it to the end, which is that in providing care, we see the person as a patient, and then there's a movement to see the patient as really a client, and this is across the mental health system. There's a move to see a patient as a client, and then with the peer support movement, there's an introduction into seeing the client really as a peer and someone that you can relate to, and then seeing the humanity or the person behind that diagnosis. And ultimately, what I want to highlight in this slide is that the person is really you. I can tell you, having gone through my journey, that I'm as effective as I'm willing to look at myself and understand myself and be honest about my own flaws, and also celebrate my own achievements and accomplishments and strengths. Being able to, as Carl Jung said, I'd rather be whole than good. And that I think you'll only be as good as you're able to stay true to that statement. And my wish, I mean, for the future of the system overall is that occupational therapists, nurses, doctors are able to actually move through this transition themselves, where they're able to say, you know what, I went through this myself. Currently, that's not really common in the system, where professionals talk about their experiences, their personal experiences, because of transference and all this other stuff that happens. I think the peer support movement has highlighted that it is actually possible. And it's controversial, I think, in the peer support movement is controversial in certain ways, but more and more evidence is showing that it's effective in helping people build a better quality of life, find hope and empowerment, and also the measurements and tools used to evaluate peer support are improving. So this is just the beginning, really, of that practice. So these are the three principles of learning, listening, and letting go. I want to share that as something that might help you to support an individual. I'll run through this quickly because it's 1:45 and I want to leave time for Q&A. But essentially, the learning is, the way I define it is really, these are principles and ideas that can help support somebody through their recovery. But this learning principle is about studying and educating ourselves about ourselves, our experiences. It's actually really, life is the greatest teacher of all. It will teach you what you need to learn. And it's being taught by others and having people to look up to guide us. But essentially, this principle is really focused on about being open and receptive to learning. And that transition from crisis to recovery begins. Is a person's really, I need help, and I'm open to it. The learning process that I think that's relevant also to highlight is that a person, any learning whatsoever, goes through these stages of being going through unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence. These are tongue twisters, and unconscious competence, where essentially a person, you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and then you learn it and you adapt, and then you don't have to really think about it as much. It just comes natural to you, and that's really the whole journey is really about a learning process. Listening is about paying attention, gaining awareness, observing, and reflecting, and taking notice and taking in, whichever way you name it. But it's really about being present, because we can't take something in if we're not there to witness it, or observe it, or reflect on it. And finally, the letting go piece is I'm still trying to figure out what letting go is, to be honest. But over the last few months, I've come to really understand it better. But I think components of it are about acknowledging. You first have to acknowledge something in order to be able to release it out of your existence. It's accepting it as well. And one of the things that we want to encourage ourselves and the people we support to let go of is our standards and expectations of how our life should be or how we need to be. And ultimately, the process of letting go leads to being peaceful, as I'm finding in my life. So what's next? Future directions are that I'm looking to connect with other organizations and other care providers, whether in peer support or in the medical field, to help validate the roadmap and some of the principles that I'm talking about. I want to create a recovery manual and develop courses that connect these ideas together. And I was telling Alpita in the beginning of this webinar that I'd like to offer something in the future for the group there, community, once I put these courses together, if I can, and if it's relevant to people's need. So that's it for me. I really thank you for your time in the middle of your day that you took some time to listen to this. And I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions that you have. And thank you again for your time. So I'm just going to stop the share.
Thanks, Moshe. That was wonderful. It was wonderful getting to know about your experiences and knowing more about your the roadmap that all of us others should take in order to get back up to speed. I definitely, it does help to see family and friends and other people help during that community help that you were mentioning.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would like to open this for any questions that you might have, and just see if you have any questions for Moshe.
I do have one question. Moshe, you mentioned in one of your later slides that it's important that the person is open to change in order to help the person. In your experience in working with others, how do you help a person become open to change? Because that's my experience, is that a person is not going to make a change unless they have that desire or they see a problem. What can we do to help a person have that desire?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question in this practice. I think it's I've helped people through psychosis, and that's not an easy thing to do. And I think the best thing we can do is just be there for the person. There's two. If you give me a moment, I want to reflect on that question, because it really speaks to the challenges that we have as care providers, and also family members, especially when they see that there's a problem and the person is not really willing to acknowledge it or doesn't want to get support. I think the best thing we can do is recognize that that's a stage in that person's life. It can be ongoing. There's many other more intelligent and qualified people to talk about this subject, but I know that some of the things that I've heard people say is that even if a person's in an alternate reality, and I forget the author's name, but he spoke to this, that his brother had schizophrenia, and for the longest time he was trying to challenge his brother's perspective, and then he came to a point where he just accepted that this is the person, that's his life and that's his reality, and it helped them to live until his dad passed away. His brother passed away. It improved their relationship, because it wasn't that conflict of him trying to get him to see things differently or challenging him on his beliefs. And I think what we can do is make sure that we understand the individual that we're supporting well enough. I've supported people who knew, and I myself, I'm letting go of this stage really of thinking that there's still something wrong with me. But there are people who know very clearly that they have the awareness that something's wrong, and they know what they need to do, but they don't go and do it, and that can be really frustrating when we're providing support for someone. So the other thing we can do is just really be transparent and say, I don't know if you're ready for change. Maybe you don't. Maybe a part of you doesn't want to, because it can be really validating to have that attention from people. Like to have people come to our attention when we need it and when we're not feeling well. And I know that that's something I took advantage of as I was going through my recovery. And right now I'm moving into a place where I don't really want to identify with that as much. because I'd rather people see me for a happy person, someone who's healthy and doing well and successful through in his life, not necessarily in monetary, but just in terms of the how I feel. So it's being transparent with the person. I think ultimately saying maybe this is the stage you're going through, and you have to ride it out. Where until a moment in time something happens and you change, because change is really a natural process. It's not something that we do. That's the allowing part, where we just allow things to we allow life to guide us, essentially. So I hope that answers the question. Are there other questions? Anything else? Comments?
It's
Suggestions?
not a question, but I just wanted to say that I agree with you. There's times that I have clients come into my office and, you know, they're here for different reasons. DSS sent them, it's, you know, court ordered, or, you know, and it's hard to work with that type of client because a lot of times they're not ready to change, or it was just recommended that they come in for therapy because they've had a lot of trauma, you know, but then they'll come to my office, we'll do an assessment, and next thing you know, they really don't return. And I could sense it, you know, where I'm just like, this person's not ready. You know, they're not ready to tap into that, because apart from just being ready, it's scary, right? It's scary to really delve into that and really go back into that past and feel what you felt, to try to process it. And a lot of people, you know, they start and they're like, okay, I am ready. But then when they come face to face with that, they're just like, no, I thought I was ready, but I guess I'm not. So it's all about that. Just being, I agree with you, just being ready, being very self-aware of, okay, I'm ready, but am I just ready, or am I ready to take steps as well? You know, so I just wanted to comment on that I do agree with that. And it's a struggle because you see the potential sometimes in your clients, and it's just like, you could have such a great life, you could be so happy, but they have to want that for themselves, you know? So I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate that. No, that's great to know. It's always, I enjoy these kinds of conversations because it helps inform me as well. But yeah, I can talk on and on. I'm noticing there's 5 minutes, and I'm rather let someone else maybe speak. But thank you for sharing that. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Yeah, and so I would say, I mean, just to that, what we were talking about, that I think that ultimately I become less and frustrated about a person's experiences. I mean, I don't work in my practice, I don't work with an organization, so there's more flexibility there. But even at the organization I work for, I've come to, Tina told me this, is that you become more accepting of others as you come to accept yourself, and so there's no impulse. The impulse is less to try to push somebody to go to somewhere, and just invite them to have a conversation. And my intuition plays a big part in my practice, and I had to learn to figure out what that actually means. And but sometimes, like you said, you know the potential of someone, and I would just say, I know you're going through this, but this is what I see possible for you. And that can be scary for people, because it means that they have to let go. And it means that whatever they're holding on to is not necessarily true, but that's their identity at the time. And the greatest gift we can give someone is that understanding. It's like, the door's always open. You can always come back and reach out to me if you need to. And life will lead them if they're meant to be in a healthy place. Some people get stuck and never recover. Unfortunately, that's just the truth of the matter. But for the people that are willing to listen and are wanting to go through that stage of self-exploration, they'll come back. And it's happened to me in my experience in supporting others. This has been great. I can do this forever. And I noticed that the time is up. Thank you again for Alpida, Scott, Tushar, and everyone else. And thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Moshe. Thank you for the session today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.